Good evening. My name is Joe Bandel, and I am the last Rosicrucian. Tonight, the topic we're going to be talking about is Oak Advantage number 24, the power of narrative. Now, right off the bat, I'm not sure that I can do this justice because as I do these videos, I don't have a script. I'm just kind of ad-libbing, coming up with what comes to mind. And this particular topic is extremely potent, and it's extremely difficult to sort it out in the proper way. But I'll give it a try. The Rosicrucians talk about the difference between realities and actualities and how important it is. And I'm just going to bring up the idea of a reality is what we believe to be true. And an actuality is what actually exists. Now, the key distinction between those two is we will always act upon what we believe to be true. But the results that we get will always depend on what's actually there. So if we're living a lie, it isn't going to work. There has to be a connection with what actually exists. At the same time, the human brain requires a paradigm, a belief system. And that belief system allows us to get from where we are to where we want to be, if it works, if it's functional. If it's not functional, well, then you get that disconnect between reality and what really exists, which is where our society is stuck. A cognitive dissonance. It's real. It's in our society, and it's becoming increasingly a problem. But the thing is, we will always act according to what we believe to be true. And what we believe to be true is, for the most part, based upon logic and reason. And logic and reason, that's the purpose. The purpose of logic and reason is to create this paradigm, this interlocking web of mental associations that create pathways for us to get what we want in life. There's a problem, though. And the problem is sometimes that paradigm, sometimes that belief system doesn't work. And we have to adjust it. But its logic and reason is based upon words. It's based upon concepts. It's based upon language. Okay? And this is where it gets kind of sticky, because there's a higher cognitive functioning than logic and reason. And most of the world doesn't believe that. They don't agree with that. They think that logic and reason and the rational mind is the highest possible truth. From a metaphysical and an occult standpoint, that is false, patently false, and it's been observed to be false because logic and reason, they ultimately lead to paradox. Ultimately, it will put you in a corner where you can't get, where it's unresolvable. That's because logic and reason, you can logically prove or disprove anything that you want. A trained debate artist can or a sophist is what they call, can logically prove or disprove any position, any state. Or they can turn around and they can logically do the opposite. And the mind follows. That's because logic and reason and the rational mind, their function is to create a web of associated thoughts and concepts. And they will, well, that's what they do. And any time that you are exposed to a concept and you understand that concept, even if it's a new concept and you've never been exposed to it before, but you're exposed to it and you understand it, it's there. It's in your head and you cannot get rid of it. You cannot get rid of it. That is the function of narrative. They will come out with a narrative, and if it is plausible, if you understand that narrative, whatever it is, it's in there. It's in there for good. You cannot get rid of it. Unless the only way you can get rid of it is to be exposed to the opposite concept, to be exposed to the opposite belief. And once you're exposed to the opposite, they kind of destroy each other or they balance each other out, and you're left in a neutral position. In that neutral position, you're allowed to think freely and openly and make your own judgment, which may one day favor one side of the issue and one day favor the other. This is why Aleister Crowley, for example, came up with the statement that basically, how can something be true if its opposite is not also true? And this leads to a metaphysical reality or truism or truth that for something to physically manifest in our world, it needs to be perfectly balanced. By perfectly balanced, it means if you think of it as good or you think of it as evil, it's neither. It's balanced. Whether we can see that bad side of it or whether we can see the good side of it. Perfect examples, tough love. Tough love is where you have to be harsh and hard and disciplined with somebody or they'll run over you. Tough love. Or the opposite of tough love, which is where what would be an example of where this person who's greedy, this person who is really kind of a hawk, if you will, kind of a predator type of thing, realizes that to truly get ahead in life, they got to be honest with people. That realization will change a person's life. And that's even recognized back in the, well, even in Christianity, religious type of things, where they talk about a bargain with the devil's going to keep his end of the bargain. In other words, he'll try to trick people, but he's not going to outright lie to them. That kind of thing. But anyway, this is all we're talking about narrative. We're talking about words. Well, words and concepts build our belief system. They build our paradigm through the act of logic and reason. And most of us have not thought through something thoroughly. So what happens is we get pieces here and there of ideas, of philosophical concepts, and whenever we run across a narrative, we understand, we just soak it in. We soak it in and accept it because it explains something. And once it's in our mind, it's there. Like I said, the only alternative to neutralize it is to become exposed to an opposite side and to see the validity of that viewpoint as well. So the thing is that words, they form our belief system, they form our paradigm, they form our reality. And our reality determines how we act. But they also form our jail. They form the box. And here's where the paradox comes in. Because we need a belief system. We need a paradigm to function. Otherwise, we'd never get any place. We need to catch our bearings, and we need to have an understandable pathway to follow. That's something that makes sense to us. We need things to make sense. Even if the very act of creating that paradigm creates a box that locks us inside. And typically, as we age, as we get older and wiser, we have to find ways to think outside the box because we become trapped in the box. We become trapped in our outmoded beliefs, and they don't work anymore. So we have to find a new way of thinking and a new way of doing. And that's not easy. And when it comes down to it, most of the mystery traditions, a lot of the spiritual paths and stuff, originally when they started out, what they were doing was offering ways to break out of the box, to think outside the box. Certain religions, like to study a koan or a riddle to find a solution. Again, how do you think outside the box? They're just trying to teach people the importance of thinking outside the box. So this is the paradox that's happening when you're talking about the rational mind and you're talking about logic and reason. When you get into the mysticism in the true sense of mysticism, I think of it in two parts. One is the internal authority that still small voice of conscience, that if we listen to it, it will guide us as a compass, a personal compass. But it's unique to each one of us, and it's an internal authority as opposed to an external authority. So that's how I think of mysticism in that way. But also mysticism is the appearance of illuminations, sudden aha moments when the light bulb comes on, and we have a sudden grasp, a sudden understanding of something that we were puzzled by. And what it does is a lot of times it shows up at the time of paradox resolution. We get caught up in a paradox, and then we find the solution. Well, the solution has nothing at all to do with logic and reason. You cannot come to it because of that. The only way you can get that solution is through that mystical process of pop, there it is. And it's there as a self-evident reality, a self-evident truth that you cannot argue with. I mean, it just is. It's so obvious and so evident that it's like, why didn't I think of that before? What was so hard about that? And that creates, it totally rewrites. It's thinking outside the box, and it causes you as an individual to totally rewrite your paradigm, to rewrite your belief system. And mystery schools and traditions throughout the ages, what they have taught is to try to create an open-ended belief system, an open-ended paradigm that allows for this mystical thinking outside the box to happen, and it allows for that mystical listen to the still small voice of conscience, that divine spark that comes in. And they think of that as the highest wisdom, the highest, most spiritual. It's seeking the divine inside instead of outside someplace, instead of the external. So what we're really, that's the antidote, because it's this mystical illumination or divine aha moment with the light bulb coming on that solves the paradox that the rational mind and logic and reason end up in. And it's always coming from a balanced place, because it's perceiving the reality, it's perceiving what's true on both sides. Chaos theory comes close to that, because one of the main concepts of chaos theory is all inputs are valid. Everything that comes in has a place. It's valid in some way or another because it's giving you information. Where you put it, that depends on you. Now we're going to get back to the main point, which is about words and how important words are and concepts are. Because what's freaky about it is the way we use words can be incredibly empowering, or it can totally be total nonsense. And I'll give an example of because of how the brain works, I'll give an example that if you tell a child, you say, be careful, don't run, you're going to fall, for that child or for anybody else, for them to understand your words. They have to mentally create a picture of themselves running and falling because you said that. And then they have to somehow draw a line through it to try to forget it. And that's hard. Because what happens is as soon as they visualize themselves running and falling, it becomes far more likely that that's what's going to happen. Drawing an X through it is like an afterthought. The main idea, the main concept, the main image has already been transferred. And that has the power, that has the impact. That's an example of the power of using words. And when you talk about it in the sense of narrative, that's narratives. The art of narrative is the art of wordsmithing that program your mind deliberately, where words are deliberately framed, concepts are deliberately framed to bring a certain outcome. And they go in because you understand them. And what's interesting is anytime somebody's playing that game, that narrative game, trying to mentally program people, they have to censor the opposing. They can't allow an opposing concept. They can't allow the other side. They can't allow a voice for the other side because that would conflict and it would neutralize them, and then the person would be left free to make their own choice. As long as this other dissenting view is censored and unavailable, the person has no choice but to believe the narrative. And what they believe to be true is what they will act upon, regardless of the actuality of what actually exists. Now, there was this person by the name of Milton H. Erickson did pioneering work in the idea of language and the idea of linguistics and mental programming, and how even simple conversations program us to act certain ways and to believe certain things. Here's a couple books that he came out with: Mind-Body Communication in Hypnosis, the Seminars, Workshops, and Lectures of Milton H. Erickson. And here's another one: Advanced Techniques of Hypnosis and Therapy. Because we're talking about suggestion. We're talking about hypnosis in a way, because a narrative is a hypnotic suggestion, especially if you're being put in a very receptive frame of mind to begin with. But we're all we're naturally receptive. When I was in the military, I went through POW resistance training. And they specifically told us that there's a problem with society, because most people are too obliging. If you ask them, well, when's your birthday? They'll go ahead and they'll tell you. You ask them, where do you live? They'll tell you. In other words, we love to be asked things, and we love to share. We love to blurt everything out, even if we shouldn't be that forthcoming. So in neotech, which some of these advantages are based on, kind of says the same thing. And it is very careful to create its own narrative, which is very much uh, it, woven together in such a way that the average person has uh, they have no defense against it. And it's comprehensive enough to where it's just remarkable how it will shred a, a person's uh, paradigm, because they don't have access. They don't have any defenses against the their own paradigm is so full of holes that when it comes up against a paradigm that is more complex and tightly woven together, it just breaks apart. But anyway, back to Milton Erickson uh, and neurolinguistics programming. Neurolinguistics programming was created as a discipline by Richard Bandler and John Grinder, and it built upon the works of Milton Erickson. I've got 3 of the early books on neurolinguistics programming. I'm here to tell you, neurolinguistics program is incredibly potent. And it's incredible how it's scary. It's actually scary how much they do. But they have the first book, Frogs into Princes. The next one, Transformations and Reframing. I'm not going to get into it because we're running out of time here, but these are what I'm trying to say is they've made a science out of using words, a science out of language, and they phrase their sentences in such a way that they go right in and they stick, and you can't get rid of them. You can't get rid of them because you have no argument against them. And the only way to neutralize such suggestions is to be exposed to an opposing concept that kind of neutralizes it and allows you a little free room to make deliberate choices. Now, I have just a few minutes left because another point to this is objectivism, or what's really organic, what's really common sense and based upon earth-based results, right? As opposed to ideological concepts. What these people who create narrative, what they're trying to do is get you up in your head. They're trying to get you in your head so that you're all concerned about something up that's an ideological value that they're trying to sell you, so that you forget about what's going on in your real life, in your down in your physical life. They're trying to take your money, they're trying to take your time, they're trying to convince you to go for a higher cause of an external authority. Or they're trying to confuse you. Because if you're confused, you can't make up your mind. And if you can't make up your mind, you don't know how to act. That's what this is all about. Let's confuse people. We'll feed them this information, and we'll also, while we're doing it, because we're going to be giving them thoughts that are up here rather than down, that have substance, And not only that, but we're going to confuse them. So that's kind of where we're at in our society, and that's why I'm bringing this up, because there is a solution. The solution is that light bulb moment that comes on with self-evident truth. And it's only going to come when you listen to the still small voice of conscience that's in your heart. The Christ spark or spirit, the master within. Um, and you got to follow your own dreams. You can't be following an external authority. Till next time, we'll leave it at that.